Thank you so much for being here on this, the second in our series of panels resulting from the killing of George Floyd. I'd like to thank in advance all of our panelists. And I would also like to mention that our SBA president, Alyssa Diaz, I believe she's in our participants list. She is one of our co-sponsors. And if I could just call on her to just recognize her for a moment.
Hello, Dean Page and everyone attending. We want to thank you so much for including the SBA and also the H.T. Smith Black Law Student Association for sponsoring and including us in the sponsorship of these panels. These discussions are incredibly important, and we're thankful for the panelists for joining us today and everyone from the FIU Law community that's here with us and beyond. So thank you. We look forward to this being a very informative and fulfilling event for everyone.
Thank you, Alyssa. I also wanted to mention that the reason for the topic change for this panel was precisely because of the interest of our audience last week. Last week, we focused much more on legal aspects, such as the First Amendment and the Insurrection Act. However, there was a lot of questions and comments where it was clear, what can I do? What can I do to help? And that's why we pivoted to this particular topic. Now, at this point, let me throw it open to our moderator, Professor Roman.
Thank you, Dean Page. I want to say and echo the Dean's comment how exciting this is and the opportunity to hear from experts in this area, and to give you a brief rundown on how this will go forward is I will briefly provide an introduction and bio for each panelist, and after I mention that a bio for each of them, they will proceed to give a 8 to 10 minute talk to give us their insights and educate us on action items and things we can do. Then I'll open up the floor to questions, and I'll have a cue with respect to that. So I'm really excited about getting their perspective with respect to these issues and learning a great deal. So without further ado, let me start by introducing my colleague and friend, Isla Cleon, Assistant Director and Professor of Legal Skills and Value here with us at the College of Law. And again, these bios are considerable in terms of their length, and hopefully Ms. Grant or others has or will send them in the future, and hopefully the panelists may serve as a resource and maybe even a group of mentors. I know I'll use them. Professor Cleon served as a law clerk to the Honorable James Jorgensen with the state of Florida, 3rd District Court of Appeals. She then entered private practice as a litigation and appellate associate. She served as a career attorney to the Honorable Melvin Green in the District Court of Appeals. And if I might add, she is one of the more beloved professors in the school. And my jaw dropped when I saw students come to her after having taken her years prior and hugging her. And I couldn't imagine anyone doing that to any other professor, let alone the moderator. In any event, let me also introduce, and I'm going to destroy names, my apologies. I was impressed with the bios. I spent a good part of the morning reading them and failed to get some of the names pronunciation, forgive me. Caryn Lavernia, could you help me with that, Caryn? Did I get that?
Got it right.
Okay, wonderful. Right. Wonderful. Assistant Vice President, FIU Office of Engagement. She joined FIU, the FIU team in 2015 as Assistant Vice President and continued to serve the university's legacy of creating triple win partnerships with benefit to the community, public and private enterprise, and FIU. Prior to this role, she helped lead City Year Miami from its founding in 2008 through years of exponential growth and major leadership transition. Shirly McWhorter, I've destroyed that, my apologies. Director of Title IX Coordinator Inclusion, Diversity, Equity, and Access at FIU. She has her JD from the University of Florida. Shirly has also served as County Court Judge for the 11th Judicial Circuit. And then last but certainly not least, Melba Pearson, former Deputy Director, Florida American Civil Liberties Union, where she served as an assistant state attorney. She had previously served as assistant state attorney for the county for 15 years. She joined the American Civil Liberties Union in Florida. As deputy director, she worked to change police practices, expand voting rights, and reform the criminal justice system, including advocating to eliminate racial disparities in the criminal justice system. She currently serves as co-chair of the Prosecution Function Committee of the American Bar Association. Did I catch everyone there, or is anyone missing? I think I got everyone. So without further ado, if we could start with perhaps Ms. Lavernia, if that's okay, and then proceed thereafter for 8 to 10 minutes or so.
Sure. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for having me. As Ediberto mentioned, my name is Caryn Lavernia. I serve in the Office of Community Engagement for FIU. And was part of my bio that he didn't mention is that I am born and raised proudly in Hialeah, which is the best city in Miami-Dade County. And have worked in Miami-Dade for most of my life. And what I want to talk about today is really how do we build alliances and become better allies, especially those of us who are not Black, but are trying to be the best, most strategic allies we can. Our work in the Office of Engagement really focuses on spending time in the community, understanding what the challenges are and what the opportunities are, and not coming in and fixing things, but partnering with community stakeholders to build solutions that work for everyone. And I'll go through some examples of some of the things our office does to support the local community. But what I want to really get to in terms of alliances and allyship is every single member of our office, number one, needs to work on themselves. We need to understand ourselves, what our biases are, what our backgrounds are, and what privileges were given to us because of the way we look or where we came from. I personally am Cuban American. I'm a first-generation American, again, born and raised in Hialeah, which is a little bit of a shelter and a bubble for those of us who are Cuban American. Part of my work is I need to understand that I was given certain privileges that some of my colleagues that grew up down the street from me in Hialeah did not receive. One example is redlining did not happen with Cubans in Hialeah. So oftentimes you have a lot of people in Hialeah who own their homes, and I need to recognize that I'm part of this generational wealth that was able to be passed down from generation to generation, which perhaps was not available to families, again, down the street in Brownsville and Liberty City. And I need to work on that, and I need to work on what my own biases are before I can take any action to be a real, legitimate, positive ally to someone. The next thing I want to talk about is, I know we all want to volunteer and we all want to go out and protest, but I think one of the most important things we can do, and I'm talking to specifically my fellow Cuban American audience participants, is have those somewhat uncomfortable conversations with our family. I know I've been having those for 20 years, and we are finally getting a little bit more reception, but we need to have those conversations. And, you know, I do attempt to call out any kind of racist commentary or comments, whether it's on social media or in person, but having a sit-down dinner conversation and getting to work and having the deeper conversations around why those comments are inappropriate, talking about the history of our community are really important. And that's where change begins, I think, with ourselves and with our family. Next thing is, do a survey of all of the civic organizations you participate with, those of you who are students, the student groups you participate in. Are those groups practicing active anti-racism? Do they have anti-racist policies? If they do not, how can you be part of creating change within that organization? How can you be part of creating representation within that organization? And if that organization is not values aligned to you and what you stand for, walk away from it. I know over the last month, I have walked away from certain organizations that give me privileges, but that have become not aligned with my values, and we're not interested in correcting some of their policies and some of their representation. So it is hard, but we need to make those tough decisions. That's the only way we get past where we are today as a society into a society that is truly anti-racist. The last 2 points are: one, before you volunteer your time and take action, do the research, read, connect with colleagues. 2 books that have significantly made me a better member of this community are Black Miami by Professor Dunn, who is one of the founding faculty members of FIU. And the other book is Devil in the Grove, which is just a really heart-wrenching but important read for anyone who is living and working in Florida, because it talks about some serious. Florida had the highest rate of lynchings per capita in the Jim Crow South. I think many of us do not recognize that, and it's important we recognize it and think about it. The last statement I'll make is: when you opt to volunteer or work for an organization that's working on racial justice, don't make it a one-time thing. Take on a project, lean on it. Your law background can be so critically important to advisory boards and to projects that these movements are working on. A couple of local organizations that are just doing really great work that I know could specifically use your talents are the Community Justice Project, which is doing fantastic work specifically focused on supporting the racial justice movement, the Black Collective, Dibby a Dream, and I'll add all of these to the chat when I pass on the baton. The Dream Defenders and Black Lives Matter Miami, and of course the Florida Rights Restoration Coalition, which hopefully you all know about, being that one of the alums of the law school started that program. With that, I'm going to give back my time because I don't think I should take up 8 minutes on this panel. But I will say, tune into the FIU Office of Engagement. We are on social media. We have a platform every day at 3 p.m. called the Cafecito Chat, where people can come on and talk about this. And we've been having the conversation around racial justice over the last 3 weeks with a multitude of speakers. So join us, check out our social media at FIU Engagement, and I will give you back my time.
Thank you, Caryn. I want to switch gears now to Melba Pearson, in part because of her frontline experience on so many levels with respect to what's going on. Thus far, I had a lot of food for thought and opportunities to examine future undertakings. So, Melba, thank you.
Great, thank you so much, and good afternoon, everyone. It's an honor and privilege to be here, and thank you all for allowing me to be in this space to share my thoughts, observations, and reflections. So, as mentioned earlier, my name is Melba Pearson. I served as the Deputy Director for the ACLU of Florida for 3 years, and I was a prosecutor here in Miami-Dade County for close to 16 years. I'm currently a candidate for Miami-Dade State Attorney. Election is this August. But more importantly, I really want to talk about the next steps, right? So many of us have been in the streets. We've had protests back to back for the last few weekends, with a few sprinkled through the weekdays as well. And there's been a lot of momentum in this country as a result of the horrible murders, let's call it what it is, it was a murder, of George Floyd, as well as the deaths of Breonna Taylor, and then the murder as well of Ahmaud Arbery. It reminds me of when I was serving as president of the National Black Prosecutors Association back in 2014 or so, where we had another season where it was back-to-back Eric Gardner, Tamir Rice, Jonathan Walker. There was just like a bunch back of unarmed African Americans who were getting killed. The difference was we were in a different presidential administration. So when those cries came from the street and people were really mobilizing around these issues, we received assistance in the form of the Obama administration putting together the 21st Century Task Force on Policing. And that was something that was headed up by then Police Chief Charles Ramsey out of Philadelphia. It had a consortium of activists, of professors, thinkers, as well as law enforcement, to really explore what policing could look like going forward. And some of the recommendations included, getting back to community policing, more diversity training, and de-escalation and implicit bias training, as well as making sure that police departments were diverse, not just in the rank and file officers, but also where the decisions were being made, the top brass, your chiefs, your assistant chiefs, the people who headed up units. Unfortunately, this current presidential administration does not see the same level of value when it comes to policing. So now we're in a different space. And as I've heard many activists say, especially Sean King like to say this, basically that all politics is local. So when you're seeing a situation where you're not going to get relief from the federal government, we really have to lean in to what we're doing on a local level. So going back to protests have like a long storied history. There are many people who, not many, but there's a pocket of people who complain like, oh my gosh, well, why are these people protesting? Why that, I agree, the video was unjust, it was horrible, but why are you blocking I-95? Well, the simple reason is because it works. And when we look back to the lessons of the first civil rights movement, because I look at this as the second civil rights movement, but the first civil rights movement in the 1960s, you had the sit-ins at lunch counters, where law enforcement came in and literally beat and removed people of color and allies who were protesting for equality and integration. You had protests in the street when it came to, with regards to injustice. You had instances such as the Montgomery bus boycott that lasted for close to a year, where people of color literally did not take the bus because of the fact they were forced to sit in the back of the bus and could not sit wherever they wanted to. So you had these prolonged actions that went on and formed the basis of the Civil Rights Act and then later the Voting Rights Act, which came in the mid-60s. But one of the things that people don't really talk about so much is the riots that came as a result of the assassinations of Dr. King and Malcolm X. And many times, the riots may have occurred in Black communities, communities of color. But at the end of the day, when that unrest occurred, that really galvanized the president, so Lyndon Johnson, all those folks, to really like, listen, we got to pass some legislation because we've got to deal with this equality issue, right? And so that's why I always say that you've got to look at the history of protest and not judge things just in this moment and say, but why are you upset? You can just go vote and it'll be fine. No, people have to protest and raise their voice because that's what puts the pressure on different entities to act. So over the course of the last few weeks, as we saw these protests going global, right? I mean, forget like, oh, it's just in Miami, New York, Minneapolis. When you have folks standing in solidarity in New Zealand, in Australia, in France, it really shows you the scope of what this issue is and how it resonates with so many different people. So you see in the last few weeks, we've had these protests, but what has also happened? You've seen now the discussion about funding or defunding the police, right? So now that is a whole other concept of, well, what is policing going to look like going forward? We've seen many police departments come out and outright ban the use of the chokehold because of the fact that it can end in a fatal manner. You see more departments now looking at their training budgets and trying to determine, how best they can train their officers. But at the end of the day, all of these are good signs. But in order to get the prolonged systemic change that we want to see, voting is your superpower, right? Voting is the way to accomplish this. We can march up and down Biscayne Boulevard. We can march all over the FIU campus. That will get us some change. But in order to see permanent change, we have to elect people in positions of power who are aligned with the values of change. And the folks you should be looking at, look at your mayor, because it's the mayor who stood in the way of civilian oversight of the police. And he made it clear in the past he was going to veto it. Clearly now he's showing a little bit more interest, but at the end of the day, we have to hold the mayor and anyone on the commission accountable for whether or not they support this concept. In 2022, we're going to have a sheriff's race here for the first time. You have to find out what the sheriff prioritizes and how they're going to go about criminal justice in this county. The state attorney is on the ballot. As I touched on before, that is an office I'm running for. But when you are going to vote, make sure you understand what prosecutorial discretion is. Make sure that you understand where not only does the discretion lie, but what the priorities are. Is the priorities going to be on low-level crimes and locking folks up? Or is it going to be about more holistic approaches that do not create a two-tiered system, one for the wealthy and one for the people who are poor and under-resourced, right? When we look at our state reps and our state senate, where do they want to fund? What do they want to fund? Do they want to fund social services so that people have more options and there's other ways of people being connected with the help they need? Or are they funding something else? So these are all questions that you need to have answered by the folks that are running for office, as well as the incumbents who are seeking to defend their office. And if that's the case, then you just have to make sure that when you're voting, that you're being very intentional, that you're educated about the issues, and also make sure that you're educating the other people in your household. Because many times, again, I know most of us here, you know, we may be the first in our family to go to law school. We may be the first in our family to even have an advanced degree past high school. So many people are looking to you as the expert to say, well, who should I vote for? Or why should I vote? So make sure that you have those answers and that you're giving good, solid advice. So with that, I believe I'm probably right at my 8-minute mark. So I will leave it there, and I look forward to answering any questions that folks may have.
Thank you, Melba. I'm going to switch gears a little bit here to a more FIU focus first with Shirley, and then I'll proceed with Isla, and I'll perhaps introduce a question or two for the panelists, and look forward to fielding those, having you folks field those questions. Shirley, thank you.
Thank you all for having me. Certainly glad to be here as a Panther here at FIU, and just want to say how much how happy I am at what the law school is doing with the sessions that you're engaging your students, faculty, and staff, as well as FIU. So again, we're all FIU except Melba. So Melba, we really appreciate your being here, and I appreciate your remarks. Very timely. Thank you so much. I think one of the things they asked me to look at this from an employment perspective, and I'll do that along with additional comments that I would make. But I want to start by telling you that now is not the time to mind your own business. Now is not the time to mind your own business. Growing up in a small town of Wauchula, Florida, where I was the only Black female on the cheerleading squad, I was captain and the only Black on the girls basketball team. All of those things shaped me to be the person that I am today. Never had a desire to go and be the diversity officer or equity officer at a university, but here I am. I find it all joy to be here, and it's certainly a pleasure to be here at FIU and to be able to engage with our faculty and staff, and most importantly with our students, and to be able to make an impression upon people, because that's what Alliance is. That's what being an ally is all about. And so while we say that, we believe in the cause, we want to be a part of the cause, even in the workplace, what do you do when you see injustice? What do you do to hear people saying things that are inappropriate? I can guarantee you through experience, right, and through people coming to me on a daily basis, most people mind their own business. That's why I started off with the conversation of this is not the time to mind your own business. And lots of corporations, lots of companies, lots of people are on this bandwagon right now, right? And it is a good thing. We're not criticizing it. We're happy. Why? No matter why you get on, we're glad that you're on. No matter that it took you this long to get on, because we've been fighting this fight for many, many years, as Melba has alluded to. But this is the time to be a part. I came out a couple of Saturdays ago when FIU when they had the march here, and there were thousands of people here, and it was just so awesome to see the diverse group of people that were a part of that march. And I was right along with them with my mask on, proud as to be, a proud Panther to be here and to see this happening. And I can tell you, most of the people there did not look like me. So the march at FIU also looked like what's happening in the world, right? Most of the people there don't look like us. And I'm gonna tell you, a friend of mine told me, he said, he's a former exec with the American Red Cross. In a conversation that we had, he said, Sherlon, racism is never going to end unless white people lead that cause. And I thought, very interesting conversation. And, certainly we had a very interesting conversation. And so I say to you, this is a time for all of us who really care about this issue to come together, to recognize, first of all, and I think Caryn said this, who are you? Who are you? What are your issues? We all have them, right? Even the country girl from Wauchula, I bring issues to the table as well. Right? We all have them. Identify who you are and what your issues are. What are your biases? What are the things that you bring to the table? And be honest with yourself. And then second of all, I would encourage us to get to know each other. Get to know each other's story. One of the things that I think is a big help is if you only knew who I was, if you only knew what I've been through, if you only knew where I come from, you would be able to see me as an individual, somebody that you can relate to, somebody that, oh, wow, you went through that? Oh, wow, you did. I remember growing up in Wauchula, small country town, and I guess kind of central Florida area near Lakeland, Florida. Growing up there, I was always radical, dating a Mexican boy that was in my class, the love of my life, right? The principal who was, they had two principals at my high school. One was Black and one was white. And you can imagine the Black principal was there to keep the Black students in line. And so he called me to his office. I'm Miss Cheerleader. I'm on the basketball team. I'm just, making good grades. I'm a star at the school. So he calls me in and he wants to talk to me. And I figured it was about some issue about the school and what was going on. His question to me was, does your parents know that you're dating a Mexican? And my response was, yes, they do, even in Wauchula, right? And so that's my background. That's where I come from, right? And so where do you come from? What is your background? What baggage do you bring? What positiveness do you bring to the table? And are you willing to share that with the people that you encounter every day? Are you willing to share that with your colleagues? One of the things that I see that happen every day at FIU with our faculty, they're minding their own business. They're busy, they're smart, they're intelligent, all of those things. And we appreciate that, and that's what we need. That's how we stay at the top of the bar passage rate at the law school, right? Because we're doing what we were hired to do. But I want to encourage you as students, as faculty, as staff, to stop minding your own business. If you see something that happens to me, be willing to say something. Because you know what? If you say it, she might listen. If I say it, they might not. So get off the fence. Lots of people are on the fence. Get off the fence. Be willing to step up. Be willing to stand up. Be willing to say something when you otherwise would not have, or when it may not be the popular thing to say. Get involved with supporting other people. Get off the sideline. Get in the game. Get in the game. Know your history and communicate with people from diverse groups. One of the things that one of the speakers also said is, look at the organizations that you're a part of. If every organization that you're a part of is a majority organization, maybe you might want to reconsider that. If you really want to engage with others, if you really believe in the movement, if you're really about allies and alliances and allegiances, think about those kinds of things. Short story really quickly, I don't know how much time I have, but one of the things we do here at FIU is we have search and screens. And that process is when people are being hired, my office comes in and we meet with the committee. We talk about diversity, inclusion, and the Sunshine Law so that we can make sure that we're following the rules. I'm a former judge. When I came to FIU, my boss, people would say to my boss at the time, why does Sherlon, and these were faculty members, let's get real for the 1 minute that I have left. No, Caryn left some of her time, so I get some of her time. Sorry. So Madam Chair, I'll take that. But what was happening is people was complaining to my boss. Why is she always saying she was a judge? Why does she have to tell us that? Well, look behind the veil. What was really going on is they didn't like the idea that I was saying that you need to have diversity on these committees, right? That's the only way you're going to get others to join and want to come to FIU. Time is out. Nobody wants to be the first Black anything anymore. That day is past, right? So they didn't like that. And so they would say things. Why does she have to say that? I didn't say that all the time, but people knew that. And the thing that I said to them, and I know my friend Phyllis is listening, the thing I said to them, if I was a white male and I was a judge coming to take this position at FIU, they would be having a parade for me. They wouldn't be complaining about me, right? That's the truth. But let me tell you what happened as I close and we talk about allies. One day I'm in a search and screen with a fifth floor kind of position. And you know what I mean when I say fifth floor PC, right? This is a high position at FIU. The provost comes in and he does his spiel and he's getting ready to leave. The provost, as he's walking out of the room, says, I'm about to leave, but I'm leaving you in good hands. The judge is going to give her charge. And when she's done, you'll know all the rules and regulations and I'm sure you're gonna do a good job. White male, provost, made that statement. From the moment that he said that, nobody ever complained again about me being a judge or about anybody saying anything about me being a judge. That's being an ally. I told him this last week. This was years ago. He never even knew the impact that that had. So there are things that you can do as white people. There are things that you can do as Hispanic people. There are things that you can do as males in a male-dominated field that will make all the difference in the world of other people. So go out, if it's your charge, if it's what you choose to do, get off the sidelines. This is not the time to mind your own business. Thank you.
Wonderful. Really comments, Judge. They were inspiring, actually. I see some clap fingers. We're showing our generation, by the way, with the class. But nevertheless, I want to make clear, first and foremost, Judge, the last thing I would ever try to do is stop you in the midst of things. And you and I need to go to lunch after this pandemic is over.
Yes.
I won't accuse you of being but maybe yours truly has been on more than one occasion in different ways. I want to then introduce Professor Cleon, and then we'll open up the floor. Thank you.
Thanks, Ediberto. I want to thank Dean Page, the SBA, and the H.T. Smith Black Law Students Association for having me today. I want to start this by first acknowledging that I'm really uncomfortable that I'm batting cleanup as a white woman when there were 3 people of color and the moderator is a person of color on the panel. So I just want to lift that up. I am not an expert on allyship. I am a 60-year-old white woman that was born in Miami, raised in the Jewish culture, and I have been entitled to have white privilege all of my life. I do not and I cannot speak of the experiences of the Black community, and I'm not even sure the term ally is appropriate. Ally puts us white folks in center. It gives us a title. It is not my place to say that I'm an ally. I don't get to decide that. But I am thankful that Professors Anglade and Cote recommended me to speak to this issue to you today. Because I'm not an expert on allyship, what I'd like to do is read a poem that was written by a Black woman named Candace LeBlanc. It's entitled, Dear White People, This is What We Want You to Do. I don't want to hear, I can't believe this. I want you to read up on the history you've had the privilege to ignore. I don't want your opinions or thoughts. I want you to listen to the Black experiences you've chosen to forget. I don't want your BLM Instagram story reposts. I want screenshots of your bailout money and patronage of Black labor, art, and knowledge. I don't want your passive Twitter likes. I want you to follow Black tragedies as much as you follow Black trends. I don't want to vindicate you of your white guilt. It is yours to reconcile. I want you to check your racist parents and call out your apathetic white friends, especially when there are no people of color there, without expecting a pat on the back. I don't want your tears. I have plenty of those. I want you to check in on your Black loved ones and respect our emotional and physical boundaries. I don't want to diminish the adversity you faced from aspects of your identity. I want you to acknowledge that your life is easier because you're white. I want you to admit that you never chose to be a Black person because you know your life would be harder. I don't want you to be a good white. I want your activism to be questioned and challenged and criticized by Black people. I want you to grow from your mistakes so we can grow as a nation. I don't want your out of context Martin Luther King quotes on perpetual pacifism. I want you to see that the only difference between the Boston Tea Party protesters and the Stonewall, Watts, and Rodney King riots is the former were white and the latter were Black. I want you to be disobedient to signal the need for change and destroy the oppressive systems that make you comfortable and powerful. I don't want you to use public demonstrations as an opportunity to play the purge or fulfill your Joker fantasies. I want you to use your white body to shield brown demonstrators from tear gas and bullets. I don't want to see another frickin' video of police officers murdering Black people. I don't want peace, I want justice. I don't want you to prove that you're not racist. I want you to know that you are the byproduct of a successful racist regime that has capitalized off Black oppression and suppression for centuries. I want you to realize that being racist is more apple than apple pie. I don't want you to feel at ease. I want you to take a look at yourself. I want you to shed light on the corners of your subconscious you've glossed over for years. I want you to know that you are racist because you have been trained to be so, and it's within your power to become anti-racist. I don't want my strength to be praised. I want you to respect the breadth of my emotions. I want space to break down and acknowledge my grief. I don't want to lose your attention. I want you to remember Tony McDade during Pride. I want you to remember Ahmaud Arbery during Independence Day. I want you to remember George Floyd when you vote in November. I want you to remember Amy Cooper at your Christmas dinner. I want you to remember Breonna Taylor when you hear a knock on your door. I want you to remember Trayvon Martin every time you see a bag of Skittles. I want you to know that this reconditioning is a necessary, lifelong endeavor. I don't want you to be an ally for me or some other Black person in your life. I want you to be an active ally because it's the right thing to do. Folks, it's not up to Black folks to cure us white people of our racism. That's our work to do. White supremacy and structural racism was here long before any of us were born. We didn't create the sickness, but it's our responsibility right now to be part of that cure. How do we do it? Well, I'm going to return back to the points that Ms. LeBlanc made. First, we have to read and educate ourselves. It is not up to the Black folks to teach us. It is up to us to educate ourselves. Jasmine is going to put in the chat tons of resources, books, movies, television series, documentaries to educate yourself. We have to admit that we have white privilege. We have to be willing to speak to it. We have to be willing to call it out in ourselves and call it out in others. You have to look inside at the implicit biases that we hold. You have to listen. You have to listen to Black voices. Just listen. Don't explain yourselves. Just listen. We have to remember that our perception of reality is not the only one. And in many cases, it's not even the most accurate one. We have to support Black businesses and causes. We have to buy from Black-owned businesses. If you want to buy some of those books, look for a Black-owned bookstore instead of Barnes & Noble. We have to eat at Black-owned restaurants, and we have to donate to Black-run nonprofits and organizations. Don't try to start your own nonprofit at this point. There are plenty of organizations doing the work. Send your money to them. And finally, I implore you, I beg of you, We have to acknowledge that this work is difficult. This work is hard. It's going to make you uncomfortable. It's going to make you tired. And at the end of the day, we have to do it anyway. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. That was wonderful and moving. More fingers. You're not going to get me there. I just refuse to acknowledge my age. But more, one of the things I want to express is how each of you called for, not unlike what the panel's title was, engagement. The rabble-rouser that I am, want to push more. Every institution in the country, just about, every law school, every university is engaging in these efforts about listening, about perhaps volunteering, about being sympathetic. 6 months from now, how will those institutions look any differently? What concrete steps are those institutions taking? And I want to throw that out there in terms of some questions and make us perhaps all feel a little uncomfortable. Thank goodness for tenure. What is FIU as a university doing in terms of concrete step to make its face, its leadership? All right, I commend the school with respect to a host of things, including in-state tuition for dreamers, for free tuition for people who have a low middle class, much more than the vast majority of universities in the country. But how does it fit, its very face, its essence, reflect this community? What concrete steps and commitments is the institution making? Not only the university, but with the dean here himself. He knows I'm not shy. What are we gonna do as an institution in terms of our leadership, in terms of mentors, in terms of commitments to outreach to various institutions, be it the various major football games between, for instance, just one example, between historically Black colleges, our presence there, not only in terms of our classic recruiters, but having faculties, having deans there, engagement and making people feel uncomfortable. Because let us not forget, Martin Luther King, who's reveled these days, was an outsider, someone that it was followed by the FBI and threatened by the FBI. He was asked to basically kill himself so they didn't expose certain things to his wife. Colin Kaepernick was the most vilified individual, particularly I would say in Miami. And now everyone wants to find, you know, a number 7 jersey with the San Francisco 49ers. He's trendy. What are we going to do after this is out of vogue? How are we going to look different? How is our power structure going to change, right? These are comments that are not new. These are references that are not new and statements that were made throughout time. When we look at the engagement, it should be more reflective of Malcolm X, frankly, than King. And these troublemakers that cause change. Me joining the ACLU or Dream Defenders, an organization, is wonderful. It's going to provide contributions, but how we get the vote is terribly important. And I don't know, Ms. Pearson, and I look forward to discussing these things with her. But let's make people uncomfortable. Let's put them on the spot. Let's put institutions that are Hispanic serving, that if you put them in South Dakota in terms of their leadership, they look awfully comfortable there. How are we different? How are we different than historically Black colleges? Right? How can we engage each other and not feel either tacitly, right, or overtly uncomfortable? After getting off my perch here, I want to go to some of the questions with respect to Judge Cote. Had quite a few, and I just wanted to raise, and there've been so many comments after Professor Cleon. But one of the things she pointed out, and I'll go to my cue here, in terms of allies, right, and being behind the scene and being essential to the effort. But I don't only see, by the way, I want to push the group, not only allies, but perhaps rabble-rousers. that maybe one day would be viewed as allies. When I think of the rabbis and the priests and others during the 1960s, they weren't just viewed as allies. They were viewed as communists, as trouble. So it's I would say not only not be quiet, maybe be a little bit of trouble. Going to Professor Cote's comment, is it possible to keep the momentum of the protests and avoid violence? I'll throw that out there to the panelists.
So I can take a shot at that. So is it possible? Yes. But this time around, we're seeing a very interesting phenomenon happening where a number of white supremacist groups are getting involved in the protests with the goal of creating violent situations to either, number one, discredit the work and the momentum that's happening, but also number two, to basically turn the police against the protesters so that there can be more violence against Black and brown folks and the white allies that support them. So one I think approach that's really started to take root is that people are now being much more vigilant when they go to protests and being more observant of like, does somebody really fit in? Because of course you can go to a protest and hang out. I mean, it's not like a judgment type thing, but if you're kind of all dressed in black with long sleeves in a hot Florida summer, why are you dressed like that, right? So, folks are starting to really look around to see who's at the protest and intervene when they see people who are not aligned with the movement and not doing this for the purposes of change and uplifting equality. If they're going and breaking windows or trying to throw bricks or starting problems, the protesters have been the ones to intervene to stop that. There's been pictures that have also come out that have been verified in different cities across the country where you see white folks breaking windows or going in and looting and doing behaviors like that. But again, it always ends up being reported with a broad brush. Oh, the protests were peaceful, and then they devolved into violence as if necessarily was the protesters driving that, when in many instances that was not the case. So is it possible? Yes, it is. And like I said, I'm very heartened by the fact that the protesters and the people in the movement are becoming much more vigilant to try to kind of head off this type of behavior. But, we can't ignore the message and just say, oh, well, they're being violent, so let's discount everything else that's going on. At the end of the day, the core message remains the same. We have to have equality. We need to have criminal justice reform. We need to have accountability for people who are in positions of power and that violate the communities that they serve.
Anyone else like to add? Okay, I'll go to the next question then. This is from an anonymous attendee. Speaking in light of the double whammy we're receiving with respect to the pandemic and the protests, how can individuals acknowledge these struggles with the challenges of existing time, and specifically, how can we support our Black colleagues and students at this time?
That I would like to address in terms of supporting Black colleagues and students at this time is, and this is something that has come up often, if people tell you about the disappointment, right, that they're disappointed about you or the people in your group, about your reactions, this is two white people, right? People of color are saying, I'm disappointed in the way that you acted, the thing that you said or what you did. The one thing that you don't want to do, don't become defensive. Don't become defensive. First of all, and we're saying this to Black people understand this is a new day. We're at a new place, right? We don't know how long it's going to last. We don't know if it's going to be lasting or not, but we're in a new place. We must all admit that. We've not seen exactly what we're seeing right now, the coming together of people, the unity of people. We've not seen this in quite some time. And so we're going to get it wrong. We're not going to always say the right thing. We're not going to always do the right thing. Allow people space to get it right and to get it wrong, right? And not be defensive on parts of white people. And for us as Black people, don't get uptight. let's help each other through this process and try to understand each other. And know that if somebody gets upset about something that you did wrong and they're willing to tell you, Ediberto, they're willing to say it to you, right? Take that to mean that maybe that's a sign that they trust you, that you've earned enough, trust from them in terms of that they can be honest with you. Look at it from that perspective. Because lots of people, I was on a conversation recently with a group of white women who had sent emails to one of my friends saying that they wanted to know what they could do and how they could help, and they didn't know what to do. One of them said, we had a Zoom like this. One of them said that a friend wrote to her, a male friend, wrote to her and said, "Where are you? I don't see you. I haven't seen you." She thought, remember, we're from different worlds. I'm from Wauchula. Caryn is from Hialeah. We're from different worlds, right? She thought that he meant, "Where are you? I haven't seen you at work. I haven't seen your face." No, what he really meant was, "Where are you on this issue? I haven't seen you. You're very quiet." There are some people that are out there like church mouses. You can't see them. All before, they were everywhere. Now you can't find them around the law school because they don't want to have to show their hand. And so, that's not a good thing. And so what we're asking of our friends are, where are you? Where do you stand on this? What is going on with you? And be willing to say it. Be willing to have the conversations. One of the things that I want us to do, and we're working on developing it at FIU, and we don't know what we're going to call it, but having these difficult dialogue, having candid conversations, and bringing in groups of people from different backgrounds to have these conversations on a regular basis, which I think is much, much needed. And now that I've met Isla, am I saying it right? Now that I've met you, you're going to be a part of some of those conversations. You have to be. So I'll be reaching out to you. Yes.
Anyone want to add anything? Otherwise I'll turn to some more questions.
Just a quick point when it comes to protesting in the light of COVID. Number one, if you're going to go out to protest, wear a mask. Wear a mask, period, end of story. Wear a mask. Make sure to bring your hand sanitizer, bring water. And when you come home, first thing you do, take a shower, take all of your clothes, put it in the wash, and make sure to keep yourself healthy that way. It's very difficult to social distance during a protest. That's just the reality because of the masses of people. You may want to reconsider going if you are immunocompromised or if for some reason you're at higher risk for the virus. I will say I saw a very powerful picture this morning on Facebook of a lady of the Jewish faith who was sitting in front of her synagogue in a chair and literally with a sign that said she was sitting Shiva for George Floyd. And she's doing that alone, on her own, making the point and taking a stand, and she's doing it in a way that's socially distant, but still gets the point across. So just try to be creative, use social media if you're not able to physically participate in the protests.
Can I just say one thing to the white folks about protests? I know that you're joining in. I support it. It's wonderful. It's important that we show solidarity. If somebody puts a microphone in your face, hand it off to a Black person. This is not your voice does not need to be heard now. That's all.
Good. I have a couple more that I want to make sure we get to. One far more provocative, and of course I'll leave that to the end. What do you say to people who are afraid of engaging with others, fearing being misunderstood or offending someone? And I think some of that has been answered already, but I want to stress it in the context of fear of being misunderstood.
I can sound in. I'll echo some of the things that have already been said, but this is not easy, and there is no, I for sure am ill-equipped to give any advice on anyone attempting to become an ally or support the movement. But we go back to, we need to do that internal reflection. And we need to be okay having those uncomfortable conversations first with those people in our immediate inner circle, educating ourselves, and then starting to find people that you can learn from before you become a vocal ally. And as Professor Cleon said, I shouldn't be on this panel. Like right now, the microphone needs to be held by people who are Black and who are generally at the front line of this movement. And we need to be okay with that. You need to be okay being called out. I know I have people in my circles that have called me out over the last few months, really over the last 20 years, that they're friendships that I've had. And I have to be comfortable just sitting back and listening to that feedback and trying every single day to be better than I was yesterday. And I'm speaking just me personally, and I really don't like giving advice on this, but I will go back to the number one thing we each need to do is that internal reflection. And understanding biases are someone, Jared Davis, who's is a great local attorney and kind of a champion. I was having a conversation with him yesterday and he said, you know, Caryn, bias, it's a sickness. It's a chronic sickness that we all carry every single day, every single day. We need to wake up and we need to medicate ourselves. And part of that is that reflective activity that we each need to do every day.
I want to, if I could respond to both of you, Caryn and Ela, what you've said in terms of not being here. As an African-American Black female, while I understand what you're saying when you say you don't deserve to be here, I understand what you're saying. I feel that, I understand. But you know what? We're happy you here. We need you here. The reason this movement is moving like it's moving right now is because that crowd is more than Black people, right? Because that crowd is full of people that look like you. I mean, so I totally get what you're saying, but I don't want this audience to walk away and misunderstand what you're saying, right? Because we need you. We can't do it without you. Like my friend Sumner Hutchinson said, if you're not there, it's not going to happen, right? We need for you to be here. We need you. We need each other right now. So thank you for being here. Don't stop. Continue to do what you're doing. To our students that are out there, we need for you to continue to do what you're doing. And it needs to be a rainbow of people, all of us. It will not get done. Why do you think Nike, the NFL, and all of these people have decided, oh, June 19th, Juneteenth, a day that celebrates 1865, when they announced that the slaves were free from slavery in Texas, Galveston, Texas. Why do you think they jumped on that bandwagon? If it had just been people who looked like me and Melba, it would have never happened. But because you're out there with us now, oh yes, we need to celebrate this. This is a national holiday and we're gonna pay people to be off on this day. Oh, and there are lots of things that people are willing to say and do because you're a part of this movement. So no, we say thank you.
And I'm sorry, Professor Roman, but I wanted to say one thing first. First, Shirley, thank you. I appreciate that. To my white brothers and sisters and non-Black people of color, this is hard. And I'm going to be as frank as I can be. It sucks to feel like you've been misunderstood. It does. That said, two things. One, were you really misunderstood? And two, I need you to look at your language, and it takes practice, but you have to step into the abyss. Now is not a time to passively sit and let other people do the work for you. You have to be uncomfortable. You have to say things. If you say it wrong, you are not going to die. If you say it wrong, you're going to be uncomfortable. So say it, learn if somebody calls you out on the way you said it, and then try and say it again.
Yes, great. Wonderful, wonderful comments, each of you. I appreciated and learned a great deal. I'm going to push more. I think it's awesome to see what we're seeing in the streets today. We saw that in the 60s. We saw that in other movements, in the 100-year effort for women's suffrage to eventually come around. I think people need to be there and be allies, but it also has to cost you. Let it be willing to cost you, or at least ponder it. The ideal of diversity and inclusion are norms today that every institution in America will adopt. and you look at, you know, the 200 plus law schools, for example, and how woeful they are in terms of diversity, in terms of their students, in terms of their faculty. Sure, they'll have a very guess who's coming to dinner, Sidney Poitier approach towards diversity, with a smattering of a few, right, African-American or Black students, preferably women, right? The Black male in the classroom in America, particularly law school, give you one example, not FIU, happened to teach recently a class of 107 students. It was daunting with the sheer number. 2 African-American males. I know in that community, right, inner city community that I was in, that percentage did not reflect what I was seeing every day in terms of admissions, in terms of hiring, in terms of promotion. I appreciate seeing some of my colleagues that are making comments at the list. But when we have to make tough decisions, curricular-wise, right, outreach-wise, it'll cost each of us, right? That'll cost us our buddy from XYZ school or former colleague. Are you going to be there? So as the kind of byproduct of the 1960s, at least born there, right, during that era, to what extent, if diversity means something, does it have a value? Right? We're going to hear the platitudes for the next month or year, with exception, I'll refrain to say what I want to say, with the exception of certain evildoers, the personification of evil. But I think righteousness and love will win. But will it win to pacify us? Will it win to do more? And I want to turn to a question that perhaps will make many feel uncomfortable. And I'm not going to identify the person's name. And if the person wants to, the person can chat to me with respect to it, because I think it's very pointed, and it relates to some of the themes that were addressed: action, what to do. What does the FIU Law Administration do regarding tenured professors? And I don't expect an answer. I want people to think about it regarding tenured professors that perform subtly racist acts, which cannot be easily proven as race-driven. Now, I'm not sure if that's a student or a professor or a pseudonym, but I want us to ponder that, to think, to what extent will it cost us, all right? When I say us as a human race, not individual segmented group, what groups are willing to do? If anyone wants to volunteer, fine. If not, I'll proceed to the next question.
I'm not going to answer the question, but I certainly would like to share some comments.
Sure.
One of the things is, to be a tenured professor is an awesome thing, right? It's a big deal in education. It's a big deal. But that does not, to the person who wrote that question, to the students out there who are listening, that does not give one the right to discriminate against people based on protected categories. It does not. And so one of the things is, we talked about standing up and how this is not the time to mind your own business. What has happened is, we as students, we as employees, that word tenure makes all of us shaking our boots. And so we don't report things. We don't share them with anybody. We don't say anything because he's tenured, she's tenured. You need to speak up. You need to say something. If you see something, if you hear something, back to being allies, right? Or even looking out just for yourself. You need to say something. And one of the things that you can do at FIU is, you can initially call over to the Office of IDEA and you can say, Shirlon, I am not who you think I am, and I do not want to give my name, but let me tell you what is going on. And we can talk about that, and we can have a conversation and see how to deal with this issue. That is really, really important for us to know. And if enough, just like what's happening in the streets now, if enough people come together, if enough people stand up, things will change. But as long as we sit there and think that, oh, they're tenured, there's nothing that can happen, that's not true. There are people who no longer work at FIU because of behavior that was not representative of FIU.
Wonderful, thank you. I want to turn to an FIU law grad, since she identified her year of graduation, and is a friend of mine, and might have even written something with me. I tend to be too busy to remember anything. But more importantly, she's a current attorney, law enforcement officer with the Department of Justice. Ms. Janelle Graham points out, class of 2008. How do we root out and transform performative displays of support for Black Lives Matters movement and get them to support financially and politically for the movement? Thoughts on that? To anyone that'd like to address it. If not, you know what I'm gonna say, push. You don't lose sight of the fact of what you are. You are customers. Your customers, not only to Nike, to Walmart, but you are customers in the classroom, all right? Just because someone has white hair and is, you know, big, ogreish, heavy-set guy, or thin, all right? A thin gal, and they use their privilege and power to silence or demean. Don't lose sight of the fact that you have the ability to engage and embark in these activities. And it's frankly, it's not enough to have the one-day event. And it's not knocking any institution in particular, but I'm seeing it across the country, from my daughter advising her, you know, what turned out to be a very prestigious institution and high school institution, and also public interest institution. The power and force of hierarchy in so many ways, based on gender, sexual orientation, color, and other ways, has to be engaged in and challenged at every step. But those that have power, as I couldn't agree more with Sherlon's comment in terms of why change is occurring and the impact and the power of allies. But allies should feel uncomfortable too and be there when things are uncomfortable, and have your voice, make proposals. There are proposals right now in law schools around the country, and Professor Cleon and I have exchanged views on them, as you might imagine. Mine might push more, but those will be there before us.
You have tenure.
I do, but it wouldn't stop me anyway. That's why I got the bald head, just to scare people. But more importantly, I would not only be there, right, for the kumbaya moments. Be there when your Black brother or sister speaks and you disagree with her. All right, be there when it costs you, and speak out. I can say in almost 20 years at FIU, to be blunt, I can't remember an instance at a faculty meeting when I spoke out on diversity that I had a white brother or sister. I'm more likely to get another person of color to oppose my comments, for instance, than they would to support it. And the silence that we hear too often in different circles, and it can be in the ACLU, it can be at the NAACP, or even the Federalist Society with respect to these things. That's my not so very quick take, but I'd love to hear your views on that.
I mean, I think those of us who do have some power and can create, for example, in our office, help create strategy and move grant dollars into programs that build equity, we need to be doing that. That's the sustainable way to continue to create anti-racism. There are a couple programs we're working on. One of them is a public interest technology fellowship, where we will place students within municipal governments to just review their public interest tech policy and make sure that they're not creating racist policies based on the technology that they're implementing. And then the other thing that we are working on, so we helped design the Montgomery Fellowship during the last bowl game. And we want to design something like that here in Miami that focuses on Black Miami, even using Dr. Dunn's book as kind of a guide. And getting oftentimes our students are living in a bubble, right? Just like I talked about the Hialeah bubble, I think we all live in our own little bubbles. We need to, if we want to work in our community and impact our community, we need to understand that history. We need to understand the local treasures and how we can help save some of our local treasures. One of them, which is constantly under threat, is the historic Hampton House in Brownsville. So we are working on building a community engagement style fellowship that students can apply to, where we go through that history. And that is an important part also of this whole kind of voyage of self-reflection and discovery, is also understanding the community that we, FIU, that we live in, and understanding all the different aspects of the local community.
Thank you. I want to finish up with a couple of, I've received quite a few related questions, and I think, frankly, the dean might be the most appropriate person to answer this. He knows I'm putting him on the spot. With respect to that, but quite a few attendees not identifying themselves have asked the following question. What is the College of Law doing to recruit, admit, and retain African-American students at a greater rate? And by the same token, another anonymous attendee, might have been the same person a minute later, wrote this related question of what is the College of Law doing to hire, retain, and value African-American administrators and staff. So I want to thank everyone and let the Dean perhaps address that in his closing remarks. This has been wonderful.
Thank you. I'd like to thank the moderator, and I'd especially like to thank the panelists. I found that really moving, really inspirational, sometimes really uncomfortable, but overall that was great. In reference just to the last question, we are at the moment listening, and we plan to do a lot of intentional actions. Watch for that soon. We have certainly made a lot of efforts in this area, but we certainly have a lot more things that I think that we can do. I also wanted to thank Jasmine Grant for her role here. And of course, thank you to all the attendees. The fact that we're going on until 1:15 or so, and I know some of you have to drop off, helps demonstrate the interest in this topic. I also just wanted to mention two other things. We will have another panel next Tuesday at noon, and watch for details. In addition, please consider watching the movie Just Mercy. It's currently streaming free until the end of the month, and we will be running a panel on that in late July. That's the story of a wrongful conviction of an African-American man, Walter McMillian, and it's a dramatization of that, and it raises all sorts of issues regarding criminal justice and the racial problems in our criminal justice system. So I encourage you to do both of those things. Once again, a really warm, sincere, heartfelt thanks to our panelists. I really appreciate that. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone. I look forward to future conversations with each of you. And Charlene, lunch. I'll see you. Bye-bye, everyone.